everyone, and welcome to the 546th episode of Constructed Criticism. I'm your host, Mason, joined by my co-host, Abe Stein. Abe, how you doing?
I'm doing fan-tiddly-tastic. How about you?
I'm doing well. I had a kind of a peaceful-ish weekend, which was nice, all things considered. I had a lot of busy weekends over the last month or so it was nice to kind of get to play at RCQ right next to my house. And then Sunday, I had a really chill day, so it was a good time.
That's good. That's good. I feel like, especially with the two RCs, two RCs a quarter now, like,
Mm-hmm.
and with you doing coverage for him, especially, like there's not a lot of downtime. Magic has less downtime than ever. It's
Yeah, it's a
like
lot, but you know what? I like it, and this was kind of my goal, right? To get to a spot like this, and that's what we're going to be talking about today is goal setting. Abe, this is something that when you first kind of guested slash you could argue tried out without really knowing it. Originally, we talked about goal setting in Magic, and it's hard to believe that we're closing in on almost 3 years since that was recorded. And so we thought it was a good time, especially with sort of all the RCs and everything, to sort of circle back around and talk about this.
yeah. I mean, I think there's never a bad time to talk about goals or even to think about your own goals. Uh, I mean, I pretty recently was thinking about what are what are mine in the competitive landscape of like Magic right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's something that even though it doesn't get talked about a lot, it's something that a lot of players really do you know sit down and think about, and it's important to really be honest with yourself about. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited to talk about that today.
Yeah, well, so let's just jump straight into it here and talk about it. And you mentioned sort of at the beginning being honest, open to yourself. What would you say is like, if you had to give like a TikTok blurb of what is important about goal setting, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think a good goal is one that is something beyond what you know you can attain, but something that is attainable for you. It should have the right amount of stretch. It should be something that aligns with what your objectives are, right? Like, you don't want to set goals that have nothing to do with what you actually want to be doing. And they should be pretty clear and within your control, right? The only thing we can really ever control, especially in a game like Magic, is the decisions that we make. And so it's really important to make sure that however you're structuring your goal, it's something that is tied to what you can control, be it that you're picking the right deck for every tournament, be it that you're coming in with well thought out sideboard plans and hoping that results will come based on that or your technical play or whatever it is, but that it's something that's not tied to just the outcome, because I think that's where a lot of goals really fall short.
Yes, I agree. And I think the like going into it with the idea maybe originally before you hear someone talk about it like us here today of like, okay, my goal is, let's say, to play the Pro Tour, right? It makes a lot of sense given other things in life, right? Like I think a lot of other things would sort of have that maybe be the destination or sort of the thing to cap off the process. But in Magic, it was really important to focus on the things that we can control and the act of sort of improving, assuming your goal is to make the Pro Tour, right? Like being better at those things and getting better at the game will naturally lead to that. And you could be an amazing player and not make the PT. And I think, a great example is Nathan Stoyer. We had Nathan come on the podcast after he won a Pro Tour about 2 years ago now. And Nathan, finished out that year fine, fell off the train, and has struggled to maintain qualifying for Pro Tours and RCs. Now, I think some of Nathan's goals maybe have changed. I don't know exactly all the details, and I don't want to make it sound like we're bashing Nathan, but I think it's important to look at like even someone like Nathan, who a lot of conversations about being sort of a new age goat, right? Absolutely crushing Magic, was struggling to stay on the Pro Tour. So if your goal is to focus solely on like end results and like outcomes of things, that's a really unhealthy goal to have when it comes to Magic, where there is just some things out of your control.
Yeah, I mean, not to get in the weeds about Nathan, but I literally yesterday played an Aether sealed RCQ where we built our seal pools across from each other, and then he defeated me in round three to end my tournament. So like, and when I talked to him about it, like, and just talking about Magic, he still has the same drive. He's qualified for Chicago, but
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, he's like, at a certain point, Magic is what Magic is, and I've got other things that are my priority right now, and I don't like. It's nice to play and to qualify. I know I'm good enough,
Mhm.
um, but you're very right in saying that your goals. I'm sure his goals before he was a two-time world champion, um, different,
Yeah.
than when you're not. Lot less to prove once you have been. So yeah, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that, not only on like the scale of, oh well, you've already made it, so then do you still want that to be the chase you're on, but even understanding that having made it,
Mhm.
or whatever making it is to you, it doesn't have to be what making it is for everyone else. I think a lot of people could look at a player like Nathan and say, oh well, I my goal is to be the world champion every year. And it's like, well, maybe that's what would make you happy, but that doesn't have to be what it is for everyone else. And down in the small scale, like your goal could be to, you know, chain enough store credit to your FNMs that you're, not paying to play your weeklies. Like
Yeah.
that's a beautiful goal. Making Magic a little bit more sustainable in your pocket. That all these things, from whatever the scale they are great goals, and I think that it just matters what's feasible and what's honest for you.
Yeah. And along that same vein, it's also fine for the goal to change as life and you sort of grow and change, right? Like you were just mentioning for Nathan, there's some part of it that's like, being a two-time world champion. There's also some part of just, he's older now, right? Like when Nathan, I think, got his first world championship, he was 18, right? And like that's a big difference between being 18 and like 22 or whatever. That's just a different point in your life, and a lot of time goes by, and sometimes things change for you. And so, the really only wrong way to mess it up is to not be honest with yourself about how you're feeling and what you want.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, to share a bit of my own goals here. When they announced they're moving to two RCs every quarter, like initially, I felt like my goal was, okay, I'm going to try to get two RCQ wins, get two qualifications, play as many RCs as possible, and get on the Pro Tour. Now, looking at some of the scheduling of those and looking at a bunch of other obligations I have, coming up, and kind of the finite nature of my time, um, I was even looking into like scaling that back to like for this standard season. If I hadn't gotten this qualification from the RC in Portland, I wasn't really gonna bend over backwards or break myself trying to qualify for an RC I did not have a lot of motivation for.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely not for two. And now that I have my one qualification, like I've been spending less time in focusing on, staying on top of multiple formats and just kind of focusing on Charlotte and, taking things as they come with a bit of that pressure off, having achieved what my new goal is, which is to just stay qualified for the RCs and evaluate as the schedule comes up, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not always going to be feasible to do everything. Even though I think I'm a player who could, it's not my goal because it doesn't make sense for me as a person. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I just think that kind of congruity and that kind of being willing to update your goals with what honestly makes sense for you, um,
Mm-hmm.
is so important and is not talked about nearly enough.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely could sympathize a lot with that as well. With like, one of my main goals for a while has been to sort of, do commentary for like, I actually like an end goal is like a pro tour or worlds type situation, some like big high marquee event. Even doing like desk coverage in my mind is sort of, being a part of a game to bring that two players, I think would be really awesome. And so, that's sort of a hard thing to get into. You kind of have to like sideline it until opportunities arise, right? So like my goal to yours was very similar with the double RCs a season, right? It was like qualify for all of them, play, try and make it to the Pro Tour, and do this thing. And when SCG approached me about working, both Portland and Charlotte, my goals had to change a lot, right? And I had to make a moment of, well, what do I want more of? Because I have this current active goal, right? Of I'd love to play the Pro Tour again and get to, do all of that. That would be a really fun thing for me, and I think something that is a good goal to have. And that's, what I had. But I also have this other goal that you sort of can only get these rare opportunities to go on, right? And so, well, this wasn't some huge deliberation for me to kind of figure it out. It was something I had to be like, is this still one what I want, right? Like, do I want the Pro Tour thing more, or do I want to, pursue this? And now that I'm like pursuing this, it's like, okay, well, I only get so many shots to do big events like RCs to prove to them that I'm someone they should take a chance on for the Pro Tour, right? So now I need to put a bunch of work in for this, and my goal
Hmm.
has changed, right? So now I'm preparing a lot for modern. I'm preparing a lot of like, I think I mentioned this on the show last week, like weird things and trying to learn the intricacies of matchups and make sure, like if Heliod's on coverage, I can talk about that in an informed way and just little things like that. So my own goals are changing kind of in this constant like shifting landscape, right? And I think there's a lot of people who probably feel somewhat similar to me in that regard of like, oh, there's some maybe like life's a little hectic, I'm unsure, and I'm having to kind of ride the wave and adjust as I go. And that can be really hard, but it's important that you just sort of like be, like we said earlier, honest with yourself and sort of reflect on kind of what you want and what your desires are. And also to that extent too, um, be sort of determined and driven with them too, is what I would say. Where sometimes the goal for somebody might be something, Abe, like I want to play the Pro Tour, right? And then, let's call a spade a spade. This current modern format is sort of solved. We're sort of seeing Hogak levels of breach dominance, right? You could argue sometimes maybe even better than Hogak. I'm not sure if I'm fully there yet, but there's a lot of data to prove that it is one of the best modern decks of its era. And we're sort of in, like you should be playing the breach, the metagame with some other fine choices. And for some players, that's really not super fun or super engaging. And I don't know how Abe feels about this. So I don't want to speak for him, but I know personally, like I think that's a fair critique. But if your goal is to make the Pro Tour, sometime and you only get so many shots, like when it comes to these RCs, right? Like for most people, the two RCs, I guess the now, excuse me, six RCs per year is like your chance when it comes to the states to make the PT. And if that was your goal and you've done all this work and everything, is it that your goals changed or you're just not having the most fun? Because sometimes making your goal involves doing things that aren't super fun.
Yeah, and I think that something you said in there about, understanding your convictions, like I think that really to me is more like understanding the why behind the goals you set. I think it's easy to set a goal of something that is clearly, it is clearly measurable of like I not make the Pro Tour. It is a reflection of, success and practice. It is something easily, communicated and easily grokked by anyone. You can, and it's also very respectable. I think it's something, for a lot of people, if you play one Pro Tour, um, you can say you've been there and you've done it, and whether or not it's your aspiration to like really try to continue to, you know, become one of the greats or chain them, or it becomes the thing that you're kind of on the hamster wheel chasing because that's what you want to do. That's on you, but having done it is really an impressive feat. And I think a lot of people set goals because they want, like the why behind the goal is they want to feel accomplished and successful. But I think that if that's your why, when you run into things where you suddenly have to do things that are boring or not fun or hard, um, it's very difficult if your why is really based in things outside of what you really want. And so it's really important, when we talk about goal setting, to know what it is you really want and what your priorities are, right? Like, um, uh, I think about how it was a lot easier for my goal to be, uh, you know, set myself up for a run at the Players Championship in the following year by earning two buys for a year at the SG Tour back in 2018, 2019, than it would be now, because there was just a lot fewer priorities I had in my way, right? Like at the time, sure, college was a big priority of mine, and I had a lot on my plate and was doing all that, but the stakes when it comes to college classes, where you can miss one or two as long as you're getting your assignments done and you can kind of catch up, are very different than having a job, bills, all these other responsibilities that come with kind of um, a more fleshed out life. And it's important to acknowledge where you are as a person and what it really is that you're looking to accomplish. Right? For me, my goals shifted a bit to kind of being able to remain competitive in the way that I had been, without all of these extra times. Right? It's been refining down what I've been doing to continue to see the success that I felt like I had previously, and to continue to grow.
Yeah.
But you could be someone who has, you know, you've had aspirations of making the pro tour, and when you set that goal, maybe the time was right, but then you got offered a promotion at your job, or something happened with your family and someone got sick. There could
You
be a
have a
million things that
kid.
happen in your life. Yeah, you have a kid, that's a great one. Things change in your surroundings, and in the picture of holistically you, and why you do things and what gets in the way of you doing things changes, and it's okay for that to be the case. The worst thing you can do is not be honest with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
um, if that why isn't really aligned, right? I think we hear a lot of great stories in all forms of media and storytelling, of like people doing things because they want to, show their kids it can be done. That's a beautiful why. I think a lot of people push through a lot of things for reasons of that, and showing that it can be done if you put in the hard work and determination. But if you don't really care enough to put in the hard work and determination of like grinding out grinding breach mirrors or Hogak mirrors, or suffering through whatever the latest design mistake is, or learning another version of a different combo deck, or playing pixie mirrors, whatever it is that's in the way, that's like, this is the thing I really don't want to do, like, then maybe your why isn't, either the why isn't enough, or you need to be honest with where you want to get, and how hard you're willing to work for it, because that goal you've set for yourself might be setting you up for failure, and all of the emotional toll that comes with feeling like you didn't
Mm-hmm.
do enough, because it's hard.
Yeah.
Like magic, being a great magic player is not an easy thing to do. That's why so many people try to do it, because it is such a satisfying thing to feel like you've accomplished. But you got to acknowledge that sometimes it means playing 10 rounds of Nadu.
Yeah.
It's sometimes means playing 10 rounds of Nadu on your work week,
Mm-hmm.
when you get home on Magic Online and doing all the clicks. It's not always easy.
Yeah, totally. And I think, that I think I tell this story a lot on the podcast, and hopefully going forward, if you hear this one, you'll remember kind of what I'm really saying. But I talk a lot about when I played RC Atlanta, the first RC, I played Phoenix, which is a deck I hate playing. And I don't really know how to to describe it better to people than I just do not like playing Phoenix. It is not fun. Unfortunately, Phoenix and Phoenix type decks are some of my highest win rates ever whenever I play them. It's a real, monkey paw curl moment or whatever. But I played it for Atlanta because I thought it was the best deck. You know, I thought it was the thing that would get me there and made a lot of sense, and it was powerful, and I converted and got to the Pro Tour. I didn't have the most exciting games I've ever had during that Atlanta. In fact, lots of the games blur together because the games were so samey, right? I felt like I was a little on wheels about it all, on rails, excuse me. And so that's something though where my goal though was I wanted to play the Pro Tour, right? I really, really wanted to play the Pro Tour, so I did the thing for the tournament that wasn't the most fun, but was something that I had thought was right. And there were other decks that were very good that I could have played as well that were more fun, but were even more my style of fun, pardon me, I should say. And I didn't. I did the thing that I thought was the best choice, regardless of it. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect about this and I do it all the time, but I strive to do it, and it was in line with my goals. And I think once again, there's no really wrong way to do it as long as there's some, conviction and honesty with yourself. And it's fine if your goal, Abe, right, is I want to make the Pro Tour playing decks I like, or playing just mid range, or playing just aggro, or whatever, right? Like I have someone in coaching, Abe, who recently started working with me. He came in, and one of the first things he said is, "I'm only going to play control." He's like, I tried other decks. I do not like them. I am only going to play control. He's like, maybe I'll try some other deck and I'll end up liking it. But going into it right now, we're going to be talking about controlling archetypes only when it comes to preparation for events. And I kind of want to learn everything through that lens, because that's what makes Magic fun to me, right? And I have a ton of respect for this person because they're so open and honest and truthful with themselves, right? There's a lot of people who are kind of the same way. Maybe not to that extreme, but they just don't say it. You know what I mean? They search and they search, and at the end of the day, they're like, you know what? Memory Deluge was the choice. I played these 3 cards and it fixes all the problems. And that's typically not really how it goes. So I think just being kind of honest with yourself and being truthful about everything is so, so important in spots like this. And unless there's something you want to say on that, Abe, I kind of want to segue into talking about how do you have that kind of conversation? How do you set goals for yourself? But before I do, is there anything last point you want to say on what I just mentioned?
Um, no, I think it's perfect time to segue.
Perfect, great. Well, Abe, I don't know about you, but this is kind of how I think about these things, and I would love to hear if you differ or hate it or whatever. But when it comes to like setting a goal and being honest with ourselves, we keep saying this, but like, what does that mean? I think sitting down and kind of picturing and imagining what what would it take for me to reach something, and how do I think I would feel once I've reached it is sort of how I go about it. So a great example of this is actually commentating a pro tour, right? If I'm commentating a pro tour, I can't play a pro tour, so it's sort of counter to my goals. And I think about, well, what would it mean for me to commentate a pro tour, right? Well, it would mean I need to consistently prove I'm good at commentary over a long period of time. I would need to get good shots to prove myself at the highest level, and I would need to really study and work on my craft. So what are things that might lead to, right? What are things I can do to get to those points to prove it to people to then hope to get lucky to then strike when the iron is hot, right? Well, it probably means I need to work on a lot of weekends because that's what Magic tournaments are. I need to prove I can commentate, or I need to work after I work and do weekly commentary stuff, right? Okay, so I got to give up some of my weekends. All right, I'm okay with that. That's not the end of the world. All right, I need to practice my commentary. Lots of people just go in and they don't practice. Okay, well, I need to practice both my transitions, my verbiage. Like a big problem I have is I definitely sometimes when I'm especially tired, I lean on words. If you ever hear commentary from me, for a long time, 100% was something I would say a lot of, right? And it was even a joke sometimes in our G chat. You would see someone type 100% because someone would say something and I was like tired. We're trying to juggle a lot of things. So my go to answer was 100% in order to sort of back them up and then transition quickly, right? Well, that's good to do 1 in 50 times, but I need to be better than that. I'm trying to work at the highest level, and I still sort of fail, but kind of growing my responses to that, growing my vocabulary, getting better at balancing those things was a big important thing to me. Pronunciation is a big thing, right? I don't want to be the guy saying Ragdivan or whatever, it's Ragavan, right? And learning the pronunciation of like Abishkar, for example, is how you pronounce Kaladesh now, per my understanding. And I worked a lot to try and get that a lot down. Because when I first heard it, I struggled, but I practiced saying it. And doing things like that and imagining sort of what it looks like and am I okay with that? And it's very easy to do the same thing when imagining, the goal of the Pro Tour or winning an RCQ, right, Abe? I have to play a lot of Magic. I have to practice a lot. I have to do these sort of things if I want to get there in a timely way, right? Well, are you okay with that? Is that something that's realistic, And am I okay also with, like you mentioned, maybe playing a deck that isn't the greatest, in order to have more fun, or playing this deck that I think is really good but very boring for me, right? Different strokes for different folks. Some people love aggro decks, some hate them. And if the format's one where aggro is really good, then you might be at a quote unquote disadvantage because you don't find it as interesting. But going into it that that's a potential thing that could happen. The same way you could mulligan to 4, for the first 2 rounds of your tournament every game and be out.
Yeah, yeah, and I think to really hone in on that process that you're outlining there for yourself of like envisioning what it is to have accomplished the goal, what it means to be at the end state of your goals, all of the things you listed, while your goal there is to commentate a pro tour, something that is not directly in your control. All of the things you listed of like, what kind of person am I? How good am I at this craft that I'm setting out to improve at? How good am I at it at the end state? And what are the things that I am doing that are signaling that I am ready to do this, right? Looking at all of the other Pro Tour commentators there have been and what makes them great or gave them the opportunity. How am I going to emulate that? And what will it cost me to do that? I think is a really important thing for like listeners thinking about their own goals to also mirror, because for me when I was thinking about making a run at the leaderboard in the SCGs, or
Hmm.
even qualifying for my first pro tour. It was pretty similar. It was like, what does it look like to be a Magic player who is, you know, good enough to qualify for a pro tour, and who is qualifying for tours, or to be one of the best players in the SCG tour. And it's like, well, I need to be playing many different types of decks and across formats at a very high level. Um, what does that take? And it's a lot of hours of research, and reading deck lists, and to make sure I can understand what the good deck lists look like, and what's important for the deck based on how people building those decks were changing them, and succeeding with them, or how they're changing them and then not succeeding with them, and what that means. Playing a lot of matches of those decks, playing Magic a lot, sacrificing a lot of not only like evenings, weekends, nights, but also there were certain social things I would just not be able to attend. There were family events I wouldn't attend because I had like an RPTQ that same weekend, or like I was having to give up all of these things in order to be able to dedicate myself in pursuit of what I wanted. And I think that when you really lay it out like that, it requires you to be honest with yourself, because when you really think about the specifics of what it is you're going to be doing to accomplish your goal, and you envision what that is going to look like in the shape of your life, only then can you really understand if this is a goal that you can and will achieve. Because if you don't, um, and if you don't do this and you just set the goal, I think there's a lot of times where you start to find that for you to reach the level of satisfaction you were looking for in what you're pursuing, that you can't actually happily or willingly give yourself to give up the things you have to give up to achieve that in the way that you think you need to. And that is a really, really painful realization to come to, and an even more painful realization to not come to.
Hmm.
In my experience, I think there's something we both have seen a lot in our time, is people whose goals were misaligned with what their expectations were
Hmm.
of what it would take to reach those goals. Like, I can think of many people close to me who over the years of playing Magic, who I've seen develop unhealthy relationships with the game, um, or have those moments of burnout because they wanted more than what they could afford. And I know I've personally had experienced times where I thought that I would be able to have everything that I wanted, but actually found that for me to achieve the success that I wanted, I would need to, I'd need to make a trade off there that I wasn't willing to make. And I think that, like you said, that honesty with yourself is so important. And that process of taking the time to think about, and even write down, what are the things I'm going to do, and what are the things I'm going to write, what are the checklist of objectives for me setting out on this quest to become whoever it is, or whatever it is I'm going to be, or accomplish whatever it is I want to accomplish. What is that going to take me? Where am I going to have to go, and what am I going to have to do? And is that all within what I'm comfortable doing and what I have the time to do? Or is it something where maybe I do have the time to do all these things, but I need to be realistic about the timeline with it, right? Maybe you want to be a player who gets on the pro tour, but you have, you have kids that you have to think about, and a family. And it's like, well, maybe I'll be on the pro tour in 3 years. That can be totally reasonable. It doesn't have to happen today or next year or year after. But if you don't sit down and have an honest, candid conversation with yourself about it, I think it's almost certain that you're going to misevaluate what it is that you need to do. And I think that process is really a great safeguard against that, and it's personally one that I employ as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just to hop on your last example right there, just to really like give a clear picture, I think to listeners. Let's say you have a kid. Your kid is 4 right now. Just for like, we're that's probably a little young. Let's say they're 6 or 7, right? They're still sort of at the age where you kind of need to watch them a lot, but they're not really going out and doing things on their own quite yet. A fine goal, like Abe just said, is like, well, in 3 years, like, and let's say you're still engaging with Magic Sum right now, right? Well, in like 3 years, I want to try and make a run at whatever the Pro Tour path is in that time. And you're still playing Magic Sum, you're getting to play on Arena and do whatever. I think that's a fine goal to have, is to be like, okay, when, little Timmy is 11, we're going to go out and, he's going to start doing some stuff, and Papa's going to get to more than one RC a year, right? And having that be your goal and be like, okay, well, in that time, I'm still gonna, I'm gonna really play a lot of limited. I'm gonna do whatever I can whenever, I have free time on Arena. I'm gonna push myself. I'm gonna learn new things. I'm gonna try to really become a student of the game. I think that's a great goal. Like, basically being like, hey, when the time comes, I want to give myself a real shot, because I know I'm not gonna have a ton of chances when he gets a little older after that too, right? Or maybe I'm gonna try to have another kid with my wife. We've talked about, when Timmy's 15, we plan to try to have another one for whatever reason. Fine, whatever. Sounds like a great goal to basically set yourself up for success and to strike when the iron is hot. And I think, for a lot of people, the act of improving is really the main thing when it comes to Magic, right? Especially like if you're listening to our podcast. I don't think you probably latch on to a podcast with the slogan hashtag always improving and really a growth mindset and talking about things like we do compared to maybe some other shows, because you're someone who wants the latest and greatest sideboard tech, and that's all, right? We don't really come here with that. We don't try to be that. We're here to try to focus on long-term planning, big picture thinking, and like goals, and making yourself happy with Magic. That is one of the biggest things we can do, is help you feel happier about your relationship with Magic. So, Abe, I loved what you said there. I just wanted to go a little in, because I don't think it has to be, so rigid like some people do. I'm not implying that you were saying it that way, but I think a lot of people could take it that way, and it can be more granular. And I also earlier in the podcast kind of wanted to shout out too. You mentioned sort of like maybe your goal is just, doing well enough at your local events that Magic's a little bit of a free roll. That's a fine goal. We keep using the Pro Tour because that's the most common thing, but it's totally fine if your goal is, I want to, like, every time my store does an RCQ, I don't want to pay entry, and I want to be splitting that top 8 money. That's a fine goal to have right now. That's not a bad goal. And anyone who tells you it's a bad goal isn't, being a reasonable person, right? Now, it's a bad goal if that's what you were after, Abe, and then you lose in the, let's say, the top 4 of 2 of the 3 RCs that season, and you're like, God, I could have made it to the RC. It's like, well, that's not even a bad goal. Sorry, that's a bad expectation with yourself, right? Maybe you should be doing more to push yourself towards making it the RC, and there's maybe more to it than that. And it's fine to maybe have a side goal of, hey, the baseline is I want to top 8 and keep the money train going, but I also would love to get a chance to play, let's say the RC that's in my hometown, right? That's what happened with the second place person in Portland, is they play all the events, to be fair, but, they got second in their hometown RC, right? That's a really awesome thing, and giving yourself a chance to do something like that could be great. You just need to be open and honest with yourself about it all. So, Abe, is there anything last part you want to say about this topic before we wrap it up here for our main subject?
Yeah, I mean, I think just I think I really want to emphasize what your goal is. Just needs to be what is going to make you happy and fulfilled with what you're doing. And your goal, like I said at the beginning, should stretch you a bit. So if you are that player who is, chaining off infinite store credit at their LGS and, is able to play their, they play their weeklies and they get the money for their FNMs, their weekly tournaments, and then they have the credit to get the cards they need, and that's great, but you feel like you want more, then maybe it's time to think about, like you just said, Mason, like maybe it's time to think about, maybe I want to start winning these things instead of just, splitting top 8 and walking away and like shrugging my shoulders and saying good enough. But also, you can be someone who's at a level of maybe you do qualify for all of the RCs already, and that's something you do comfortably, and you want to get better, but the Pro Tour feels like the next logical step, but there's plenty of steps between. And, when you're thinking about what it is that you're doing and what your goals are, I think it's important to go back to, what you said about commentary of like just setting out what are the things that I'm going to be doing that are going to make me Like I'm going to be doing this habitually. It's not going to be, something I have to think about all the time, and therefore I'm going to be, that much better at it. How am I going to get there, and what are those things going to be? Um, and do that right. If it's, I mean, I think Spencer had a great goal a few years back of realizing he was not really an aggro player, and so it was like, you know what, I'm going to sit down and understand how to play different kinds of aggro decks. That's something I need to work on for my development as a player, and so I'm going to sit there and play a bunch of mono red. Like you can be an RC qualified player or someone who consistently qualifies for RCs and has a good process for that, and maybe understand that your range needs to expand. Or maybe your range is your strength, but you don't ever really specialize in anything. And maybe you should pick up, maybe it is time to learn how to be an amulet one trick or figure out combo decks or whatever. I've had some conversations with players much more successful than me who have different strengths and weaknesses than I do. And talking about our goals is one of like my favorite things about going on Magic trips with players who are ones who I admire. So, just all in all, saying that there's no right or wrong goal to set, and no one can really tell you have set the wrong goal. At the end of the day, it's up to you. But your goal doesn't have to be anything that someone tells you it should be. It should be what is going to make you feel content and fulfilled with what you've done and ready to set another goal for yourself, right? That's the point of hashtag always improving, is moving, one step up one rung up the ladder, one step forward every day so that you're getting that much better.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Well, that's going to do it for our main topic. Thank you so much for listening to that part. We're going to move on to the Patreon question here. If you want to support the show, go to patreon.com/ccmtg. You can ask a question on the show as one of the perks. All the other benefits are listed there. And shout out to our most recent patron, Kobe. Our most recent Patreon question is a bit of a doozy, so I'm going to read it all here. Of note, this is a question that was asked in our Discord. We have some conversation channels, and we actually had a conversation about this with this person about a month ago. I'm unsure. I can't remember if you replied, Abe, but I remember I wrote up a thing. But I think it is a really good one to talk about for maybe everyone at home. So, Control-Alt-Delete asks, hey all, I feel like I'm at the point in my Magic journey where the only way to improve at the game is by playing a lot of Magic. Examples of like, I watch replays, I consume a lot of content, etc. But I don't like to play when I'm not 100% on my game. Only when I'm well rested, not tired from work, and don't have a million other things on my mind. Mostly because I hate making mistakes that I know I wouldn't have made if my mind was in the right headspace. These days are unfortunate because less and less time to do that due to things like work and family life, etc. Anyone have any insight on how to navigate this? Yeah, so I remember when this was put into the Patreon section of the Discord, and I replied to this a little bit. And when I felt then and when I felt now is there's a couple things. The first one is I feel like there's a little bit of lack of grace going on here for oneself, where we made some mistakes when we were practicing or trying to play. We're not 100% optimal, and we should like be okay with that, right? Like you're not going to have a chance to be 100% all the time, and you need to sort of get it in the practice where you can, because it does sound like, sort of like we talked about today, you have a very busy life going on, and you have to do sort of what you can and understand that hopefully when it comes time for the main tournament, you're going to be well rested, all those things. But also, given what you just said about, work and family life, etc., well, you're probably not going to be 100% at the tournaments as well. So playing a little bit and getting used to the fact that you're going to make mistakes and you're human is very normal and very important, because it's just going to be a very common thing. Very rarely are you going to be in 100% headspace. And as the day goes on, you're also just probably not going to be at your 100%, right? Maybe you slept great, got a great breakfast, had some chill vibes on the way to the RC. Round 1 and 2 go great. And then, you stub your toe, or you get, a frustrating text from a friend who did something stupid, or, you have this really bad judge interaction, or you have this bad player interaction where you get a little unlucky, and now suddenly you're not at your 100%. So this is something you just have to kind of deal with. And that's sort of part 2 of, I think there's a little bit of ego going on about like, I'm better than this, or I shouldn't make mistakes like this. And I think it's really important to sort of set that aside and push it down and be like, hey, I'm going to make errors. I am a human. The best thing I can do is try to set myself up for success long term and learn from these mistakes. I'm going to make them, and I'm not going to ever play a perfect game of Magic. So those are sort of things that jumped out to me, and I remember talking to this person about for a little bit. Abe, what about you when it comes to this question? What would you have to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't remember what I said in response to this when it was posted, Because I don't know, I say a lot of things, I forget a lot of things I say, and I like to repeat myself, so it's fine. Um, but I think that a lot of what you said is really true. If I can add on to, the idea of, you know, being 100% on your game. I've talked about this on the show a few times, but I'm a big believer in something I read in a book called Elements of Poker, which is just this poker pro and poker coach who talks about some of his ideas uh, in regards to what makes a good professional poker player and what are some of the things people don't really talk about a lot. And one of those things is having an A, B, and C game. Where A game is where things are going, like, things are great, you're feeling great, when you're playing your sharpest, how good is your game? Your B game is kind of your normal, maybe you're not, you didn't wake up, super fresh, but it's not like a bad time. And then C game is like, you're on tilt, or things are going badly for you, or you've got a lot on your mind, or you're exhausted. What is the quality of your play under those kinds of conditions, and what kind of player are you? And it's important to acknowledge the existence of these multiple states of your own condition when you play, because if you don't, then you can fall into a trap of, thinking really, maybe you really are a superb A game player, but if you have a terrible C game in poker, that means that two or three things start to go wrong, or you have a bad day and you don't really recognize it, and suddenly, like in poker, you're going to lose a lot of money, right? Because you're going to make a lot of bad decisions that normally you wouldn't make, and you'd expect yourself to be playing better because that's how you play on your A game. That's how you like to play the most. So I think it's important to acknowledge that either practicing and playing and still engaging when you're not feeling at your A game is necessary. Um, but also that, there are, especially in this example, there are a lot of reasons why you're not on your A game that I think are things that if you sit down and reorganize the structure of your day, you could work around. Like if it's that you have to be well rested, it's not before your workday, which takes a lot out of you. Or sorry, not can't be after your workday, which takes a lot out of you. You've got a lot on your mind. Then either A, maybe it's not the right time for you to engage in it. But if you are going to be engaging in Magic and it's what you want, then maybe the answer is to wake up 2 hours earlier and just go to bed 2 hours earlier so that you can play 2 more hours of Magic online before you go to work, right? Maybe the answer is you wake up at 5 in the morning and go to work at, 7:30, instead of waking up at, or at 4:30, and you instead of waking up at 6:30 and going to work at 7:30, and then at the end of the day, coming home and just going to sleep early enough to make sure you're still well rested and still having time to do those things, because then you won't be tired from, your long day of mental exertion from work, and maybe that's how you work in the time. But I think that in totality, um, life is not going to be a place. Life is not perfect. You cannot always just expect yourself to be playing at 100% or at your most well rested, and it's great too. And it's good when you're able to have those circumstances to work to make sure that that's most of what you get to have, especially when you're doing something like competing at Magic. But also, it's important to get the repetitions in and play the games when you are not, because you're not always going to be at like an optimal performance, in terms of your physical status most of the time. Like I think that, what was it, Niall put out a video I think about a month and a half ago, video and article about like tilt and your psychological performance, and I thought it was really it's really interesting. Something I did not know was kind of the psychological aspects you brought up in that article, of like how when you learn things, your brain moves them from like kind of a state of like, oh, this is something I need to cognitively think about and remind myself, um, to then like a stage two of it's kind of like in between something you have to think about actively and not, and then three is where it's kind of something that's really subconscious for you, and something you don't actively have to think about. And in acknowledging that, you can identify when you're tilted, or when you're upset or distracted or whatever, and your emotions are more like engaged. It gives you a way to like use that as a barometer for what is in that first or second stage of learning for you and what is really cemented in that third, because the things that would not be affected by your hindered decision making would not be affected in the same part of the brain as the other two. So like your things that are fully completely encoded into your thoughts and that are natural for you at this point, that you've learned really well, those things won't be as inhibited as things that are still kind of in process. And I think that similarly, it doesn't have to be necessarily like, tilt or whatever, but by doing things, it can kind of give you a way to either continue to build them in so that they're getting more ingrained correctly into your mind, but also you can go back and look at those replays where you're not playing your A game, maybe at a time where you don't have time to really play because you're too tired to, but you can do one of the other things that you're talking about, watching replays, consuming content, etc., and watch some of those replays from when you weren't playing at your best and understand how you can maybe take additional steps to ingrain those the things you feel are simple mistakes for you into you as things you need to reinforce better to make sure the things that you're holding on to even when you are not at your peak. So that's my insight, is kind of like two things. One, look at your whole holistic structure and get creative in how you can fit in the time if it's really a priority for you. Taking a drastic step, like I know personally, like waking up 2 or 3 hours earlier and going to bed 2 or 3 hours earlier to facilitate having more time where I'm mentally fresh to play Magic. Sounds like a nightmare because I love to stay up late, but if that was really my, like, depending on my goals, it's something I would do. And B is to still find ways that engaging, even though it's not how you prefer to do it, because it is still important to your development as a player. Because like Mason said, you're not always going to be able to play at your best performance, and it's important to give yourself an understanding of the fact that that's true. You're not always going to play your best, even though you think you should know better. Perhaps you don't intuitively just know better, and you need to practice more.
Yep, definitely. On that note, before we move on really quickly here, Abe, I wanted to get a coaching session in for League of Legends. I signed up for this website. That was pretty interesting, and the time I could make it work was 8ish a.m. And you know what? I was like, all right, well, if I want to do this, I got to go to bed a little early, get up a little early, and it made it work with my work schedule. So it's all about it. I sympathize with that. Next up is hashtag always improving. It's sort of the main point of the show, which is we try to always be thinking about how we could be getting better than we were previously, even if it's small things or big things in life or magic. That's a big part of the show. And Abe, I would love to hear your always improving moment this week.
Yeah, so my always improving moment this week actually comes from the modern format, where I have a friend who is currently qualified for Pro Tour Vegas, and he really wants to see some of us qualify with him, but he also doesn't really want to just sit down and play Breach because he is already qualified and doesn't enjoy it, and that's not part of his goals. So he kind of tasked me with helping him find the deck with the best vibes, which doesn't seem like it would be a great always improving moment, but in playing a lot, and what I've been wanting to do, especially, and this has continued to be my priority with Breach, has been to play the other decks in the format and understand how they're trying to attack the format so that I can make sure that my Breach list come Charlotte is as good as possible, right? Like, I think that that's really, really, really important to not lose sight of, is that on the weekend of Charlotte, there will be people who are trying things to get a step ahead or think that they have plans that will beat Breach, whether or not they're likely to. Whether or not Breach is still better than them remains to be seen, but people will try. That's a fact. And so in this has been playing some of the new ideas I think people will be excited for, and things that no one playing Breach has really had to think about a lot. Decks like Hollow One, which is, I think, at least currently, my like front runner for least developed but most exciting deck in modern at the moment. But looking at the Hollow One lists, no, Ketchumos is that's for the birds. I'm not doing that.
All right,
that's
so look at the Hollow One.
3 mana. It's here's the thing. Ketchumos is a turn 3 play. Hollow One is a turn 3 deck. Okay, so we're thinking, and Grinding Station also turn 3 deck. So we're thinking about what's going to matter here. I'm not really a believer in catch from us. I'm keeping it a buck.
All right. All right.
Be honest here, but I think that Hollow, there's a lot of ways to build that deck with varying amounts of speed or synergy, or but no one's really been, at least in what I've seen in deck list dumps, changing much of anything. I've seen the same 15 card sideboard that doesn't make a ton of sense. It's basically like 4 Charmaws and 4 surgical extractions, and then seven shrugs. It's like 4 gut shots for you play against bowmasters, I think, and like and like fuel the flames, because theoretically that card would be good um, against Boros. But I digress. I think there's a ton of different ways to build that deck, and so um, I'm kind of working on trying to work on this deck to attack the format that is and find the priorities of what really matters. With this friend of mine, and in that also understanding, as grinding station, how am I going to have to build my deck differently to react to people playing some of these new things to try to attack the format, but also in working on just those basic tuning and deck building fundamentals of, like, how am I taking this concept that has a lot of raw power and making it so it goes from a hodgepodge of slots to a real sideboard with plans and understanding a deck on that level. So that's what I've been working on last couple weeks, or I guess last week, since that's when the card's been out on Magic Online. But what about you, Mason? What's your always improvement move this week?
Yeah, mine comes from getting ready and playing this RCQ. So I finally got to play an RCQ this season, which I've been grumbling about on the show that I just haven't had time, / they haven't been around me. And when the time came, I thought I had got all the cards in that I needed to play Gruul, but I had forgot Higher Claw somehow. And so it was like, dang, okay, I really wanted to play Gruul, I can't. And I tried to get together the Convoke stuff that I thought was pretty good, and I just couldn't really. And I was kind of like, I have Esper Pixie. I think the deck's good. I actually like Gruul a bit more than Pixie and the Abstract in the metagame right now. But I was like, well, this deck's really good. Maybe it's even broken. I should just play it. And I had not spent a lot of time playing Gruul, really working hard to understand sideboard plans. I sort of just kind of knew what players were doing for an extent, but didn't really spend time thinking about it. And I spent just a little bit of time trying to think about what I would do and why and how I want to play the games out with sideboarding this or that way, or sort of what I wanted in my deck post board for those reasons. And I definitely didn't solve it all before my RCQ, but in the event too, combining that with a little bit of time thinking about kind of how those games played and what the structure of my opponent's deck looked like and how they seemed to want to be playing things, I was able to put together a sideboard that I felt pretty good about. Ended up losing in the finals of the RCQ. And won some tough matches across the day, and also won a couple where I felt like understanding sort of my role and thinking about the cards I kind of want came up pretty huge. And I think the biggest example of that was actually against Convoke, where I was thinking about sort of how am I going to beat this matchup? I kind of wanted to play Convoke in part because I thought I kind of dunked on Pixie a bit. And thinking about my games I had played with Convoke, and specifically Jeskai Convoke, and also the games that I've played against them with Pixie, I thought about how their post-board games, there's a lot of non-creature spells that matter a lot, and a lot of the matchup to me felt about stopping Gleeful Demolition Broco draws. And so I ended up bringing in Spell Pierce as a way to fight over cards like Case of the Gateway Express, which is very polar in the matchup, and cards like the post-board interaction things, and the Gleefuls, and also theoretically the Imodane Recruiter type stuff. And ended up happening that first round top 8 I'm playing against Convoke, and I on the draw bring in my Spell Pierces and change my sideboard up the way I kind of thought would make the most sense, and thought about it a bit more after playing games 1 and 2, and ended up keeping a 6-card hand that had Spell Pierce on 1, and Spell Pierce, Gleeful, and then drew another one, and sort of eventually my opponent fled out a bit, and I bounced their Imodanes, and they end up trying to go for the Train the Troops, and I Spell Pierce it because we were sort of at a very low, neither of us has any pressure on the board state. And I think that had I not really thought about those games prior, I don't know if I would have been willing to pull the trigger on Spell Pierce in the matchup against the deck that plays 28 creatures or whatever, right, in its main deck, but post-board plays a ton of non-creature spells. So
Yeah, I think that's like it's really easy to think that Spell Pierce is only good against non-creature spell decks, but it's good to recognize like the post sideboard configurations, and especially to like do the work of doing that before showing up to the tournament instead of just kind of, you know, like assuming like really looking at the deck list is really important in doing the work. So that's glad that it paid off for you.
yeah. Yeah, I even went through the whole hassle of borrowing pest control from some friends. I just never drew them all day, even though I needed to draw them a bunch. Anyways, though, that was it for the main topics. Today, we want to give a shout out to some of our sponsors, Untapped.gg. You can find our affiliate code link in the description of this. It is free to download. They do have a premium service, but you do not have to buy that in order to, one, help the show, or two, use it. That just has little bonus features. The main thing behind Untapped.gg is a deck tracker. So when you're playing Arena, you can kind of see what's in your deck. It also has a pretty cool limited mode to kind of give you an idea of what's going on there. So check out their website. And then now the show is also sponsored by Mana Traders. So you can use code CCMTG to go in and get a discount on your Mana Traders. We've been thinking about going to Magic Online and practicing maybe for some standard RCQs or maybe the modern RC. And, maybe the price has been a bit of a barrier of getting a deck. Check out Mana Traders. They have different tiers. I've used Mana Traders for years and have been sponsored by them personally. I've always had a great time with their service and their customer support. So check out Mana Traders. You can use code CCMTG when you sign up to get a discount. And last but not least is the swag store, where you can pick up CCMTG merchandise if you want any. And that is all in the description of this episode, both on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. And by the way, I had someone ask in Portland, Abe, if the wristbands, they had to pay for them, like the ones we hand out. And the answer is, if you find me, yes, but if you find Spencer and Abe, no. So make sure to go up and... No, I'm kidding. We hand those out for free or whatever. They just they thought maybe they needed to pay for them. I'm like, no, just take them. These are super cheap. But that is going to do it for this week's episode. You can find us on YouTube as well. That's a great way to support the show. And if you want to find the podcast on social media, we are Constructed Criticism or at CCMTG, depending on the social media site, everywhere. Abe, if someone wants to find you, where can they go?
People can find me over at Blue Sky, username or nothing. Same with Twitter. You can also find me there, although I say this every week now, but I'm using Twitter much, much less. Blue Sky is really the best place to find me, and you can DM me on either platform for coaching. I do know I have one or two people to reply to currently that I'll be replying to after this recording. So if you're one of those people listening to this episode and I never reached out to you, then maybe you should email me at morenothings@gmail.com, which you can also do. Just put coaching in the description. Mason, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on all social media platforms at Mason E. Clark. That's both Blue Sky and Twitter. You can find me at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark, where I plan to do some kind of mock commentary stuff here pretty soon on there, just as some practice. So, we'll see how that goes, but that's something to check out, as I don't get to use that a bunch due to coaching, which, speaking of which, I spoke last week on the show. I'm speaking about it again here. I am sort of tightening the reins once again on how much coaching I'm going to be actively doing with, this double RC per quarter thing. It's just there's a lot going on, and if I want my goal, for example, to commentate the Pro Tour like we talked about, that means cutting into my coaching a little bit in order to practice and perform well at these RCs on coverage, so that I may, hopefully get that opportunity, sort of per what we talked about today, I'm implementing. But if you want to get coaching, before I sort of tighten things up a little bit, I'm sort of leaving the door open for people for the next couple of weeks to kind of message. That doesn't mean I'm closing things down, by the way. If right now isn't a good time, or maybe you're listening to this in the future, it doesn't mean I'm not accepting new people. It simply means I'm cutting back from a 40-hour work week to a more manageable one when it comes to having these other things I have to juggle as well. Obviously, 40 hours with a lot of people work, but I'm working way more than that right now. I need to cut down a little bit. So you can reach out to me via the social media, like I mentioned before, at Mason E. Clark, or my Gmail, masoneclark@gmail.com, and put coaching in the description. That way I know you're not a spam bot. Thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode of Constructive Criticism, and we'll see you next week for another episode of CCMTG.
magic, magic, magic.